very, very much. Can I too begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. Can I acknowledge the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, Sally Capp, who is here this morning with us. It's always a pleasure to see the Lord Mayor. To yourself, Karen, to Paul, to the Chamber, to past CEOs who are here, to the board, everyone, to all of you ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time this morning. Can I acknowledge my leadership team who are here? David Southwick, the Deputy Leader of the party, there he is. David Davis, our Upper House Leader. Georgie Crozier, our Upper House Deputy Leader and Shadow Minister for Health. My Chief of Staff, Nick McGowan, who's here as well. Candidates, Jess Wilson, John Pasuto. To all of you ladies and gentlemen, can I especially acknowledge my good friend and, do I say fellow traveller, Stefan Romaniel from the Association of Ukrainians in Victoria, Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations. Stefan is a powerhouse of the Ukrainian community. My mum is Ukrainian, and I can say we were thinking, what should we get the audience to do now that a couple of Ukrainians have got the floor? Do we teach them how to say cheers? What to say before a drink? Do we say... Stefan can sing really well in Ukrainian, and it's a very big Ukrainian thing in the community. Stefan always sings. A lot of people always sing. It's usually at night. But I will say one thing. The Ukrainian community in Victoria is deeply appreciative of not just the work, but the recognition of what is occurring in Ukraine. And both Stefan and myself have family in Ukraine. All of my mum's family are still in the east of the country. And we get every so often pictures, WhatsApp, Viber, all the different apps they use now, back from home or back from Ukraine to see what it looks like. And some are in Kharkiv, in the city, and most of them are in a village about 70 or 80 kilometres to the south. And it's very confronting. And it's very confronting, I guess, it's not the only war zone in the world, and it's certainly not the first, and it sadly won't be the last. But it is very confronting when it's places you've been, places you've seen, and it's a country that is trying its hardest to achieve independence, to stay independent, and to become a genuine multicultural European nation. And they're trying to get where a lot of nations like Australia have been for a long time. And they're trying their hardest to get there. And whether it's through belligerence and then invasion from their neighbours, they can't get there. So it is particularly for Stefan, who devotes his life to this, for the cause of his country, his family's country. I should say our country, it's our country's Australia, but our family's background. It is something that means so much. So I'd just say how deeply appreciative the community is in this country, the Ukrainians in Victoria, particularly to the Chamber and to so many other communities who are helping us at this point in time. It is certainly acknowledged and deeply appreciative. So thank you. Thank you. Okay, yes, it's about 79 days to go to an election. Yes, I've been here before. Yes, my kids are like, are you ever going to be home again? So does my wife say that? My mother, I have to refrain from getting her to call talkback radio. Yes, she's Ukrainian. Yes, she's passionate. Yes, you can't criticise her son. Did you hear that to the two tables of media? You can't, I'll stick my mother onto you if there's a problem. And she, she can be pistol. But it is a turning point for the state, and forgive me for being a little political at 7:30, 7:45 in the morning, but I'm a politician and I will be. But, we are at a real turning point in our state. And it's not just because of COVID. It is the kind of Victoria we want to see over the years ahead, the kind of Victoria that government is giving us today and what we can have into the future. And I believe so much in this state. It's where I was born. It's where my children were born. My wife is from. We're all from here. We want this, our home, your home, to be the state of the nation. For Melbourne to be the world's most livable city. We want Victoria's best days to be ahead of it, not behind it. We want to be confident about our city, and not just the CBD, but the whole state. The whole state. To do that, you need a government that is confident about the whole state, that engages the whole state, that acknowledges where we're at and where people have been, and as Karen said, what people are feeling. I travel a lot. I get out of Melbourne a lot. I hate being in my office because every day, every minute I'm sitting in my office, I'm not talking to people, listening to people. And that's my job. in government or opposition. It's not to sit bunkered up in one Treasury place, it's to talk to people, to talk to you, to this chamber, to councils, to industry groups, to people who spend their days, their weeks, their lives focusing on issues, industries, topics, who know it better than anyone in government. And I've said this plenty of times, and I'll start by saying it again, what the state needs more than ever is that kind of attitude change from the people who run it. Because where we're at today is an electorate that in many parts is very angry and very upset, hurt about what's occurred, because they were told we were having the world's longest lockdowns to get an outcome that would be the best healthcare system in the country. And what we wake up after 2.5 years of lost learning for our children, mental health problems for ourselves and our children too, failed businesses, struggling to get back, people who've lost a lot of money, people who've been locked down, particularly in the growth areas on, 3 bedrooms, 410 square metres with 3 kids inside. That's not pleasant for 2.5 years. People like me and my wife and many of you who had to be teachers for the best part of 2 years, which we're not trained to do. Kids with learning difficulties, ADHD, on the spectrum, other issues, who were denied that kind of care, which they usually get in school. So it's put them back 2 years. Parents notice it. And then to be told at the end of this, by the government of the state, give us a pat on the back. Really? Really? That's what you get particularly in regional cities and growth areas in this city and in this state. And people want to know that where we're going, there's a vision, there's a plan, and the government that comes next is going to stick to it. We have serious issues in this state with our healthcare system. I don't need to tell everyone in the room this, you know this. Politicians, particularly in government, will try and tell you, don't look over there, look here. I've got a hard hat and a high-vis vest, look at me. That does not mask the issues that Victorians know are on their mind about the quality of our ambulance service. It's not the people working in it, it's the structure of the system and the management of it. Hospital system where you can't get a bed, EDs that are full, tents out the front of most hospitals to triage, to get people in there so the ambulances get back on the road because they're full. This is the system that we all were locked down for, that was going to be better when we came out than when we went into it. The system has been wrecked. It's been wrecked by bad management, not from the people working in it, but from the people who've been running it. And the buck stops with the minister. I've been a minister. I took responsibility for the things that went wrong in my portfolio. Why won't this Premier and the Health Minister take responsible for what goes wrong in their government outcome? They've been in government for the best part of 20 years. 20 years. 20 years. Apparently it's Scott Morrison's fault. Apparently if you go to Parliament, it's Jeff Kennett's fault. Jeff Kennett wasn't Premier for 23 years ago and apparently still his fault. Or, mine, probably my dogs, my neighbours, someone else's, except the people who should take responsibility. A government that takes responsibility and gets us back on track. Right, so we know there's a big issue with the healthcare system in this state. And I've said very clearly, I know this, you know this, the government's priorities is to build a rail loop from Box Hill to Cheltenham. They're forecast in this budget $35 billion. We all know it's going to be a lot more than that. The Parliamentary Budget Office that they established has said the full amount, the 3 sections, will cost closer to $200 billion. Government now won't tell you how much it will cost. Is it 35? Is it 50? Is it 125? Is it 200? Best than that, is it still a suburban rail loop, or apparently now it's only going to be 1 section built by this government, not 3. So that means it's not 24,000 workers, maybe it's 6. It's a rail link to Monash Uni. Is it a suburban rail loop? What is it? And who signed off on this and who thought of this? And who said that's the most needed priority for the state right now? Because I say it's not. That money should go into health. I've committed to rebuild or upgrade or build new 11 hospitals around the state. That's got to be our priority. Yes, I know the planning system needs reform. I know we need to work with local government on local infrastructure. No, we're not going to stop building major infrastructure projects around the state. Yes, we need to focus on education, but unless we fix our health system first, which is all our health, then there's a real problem. If you don't prioritise fixing a system that's been broken, then there's a problem with the government. And you can't do both. This line that we can do this, we can pull a rabbit out of a hat over here, bunk 'em. It's rubbish. You know it and I know it. Because what they'll do is put, here's a $1 billion project like the Melton Hospital promised 4 years ago. We'll put $30 million in the budget. We're going to buy some land. The project's commencing. Put up the advertising boards. But it won't be paid for till the out years, which is after the following election in 2026. That's not building a project. That's not solving a healthcare crisis. So we've committed to building hospitals by using that money and reallocating it and putting hospitals in Mildura, Wodonga, Warragul, Melton, Children's Hospital in Werribee, which we committed to tomorrow. As this group would know, one of the fastest growing areas in Australia, Melton, Werribee, an infectious diseases centre in the city. The infrastructure we have to get right. Okay, that's the infrastructure. That's how we pay for it. It's the right thing to do. It needs to be done. Attached to those hospitals are training facilities so that in 4 or 5 years' time, when that part of the hospital is complete, as opposed to the clinical, it'll take a bit longer, then you can start to train the doctors and nurses in the future. And La Trobe Uni studies will tell you 85% of people who study in these facilities stay in that location. It's why we launched a standalone training facility in Shepparton at the start of the week, because the Goulburn Valley needs more healthcare professionals. If they train there, they'll stay there. Ask Georgie, she was a nurse. She'll tell you. They train there, they'll stay there. That's why we need to get that right. The staffing of these hospitals is very important. See, when you can't argue with the infrastructure of the hospital, as the government can't because they know it's right, they then say, oh, but you can't staff it. When that question's answered, then there'll be another one, oh, but. How about just accept that it's the right thing to do? Yeah, we know there's a staffing issue. That's why we'll have a fabulous staffing policy to match that. Not today, not tomorrow, but in a period of time before I won't announce it today, but before the election. Because we do need to staff it. But I might add, as I've just said, those training facilities will be done before the hospitals commence, and those staff elements will come on first. You've got to staff it, but you've got to build it, and you've got to have the money to fix it. And it's the biggest issue in the state, and anyone to deny otherwise is living in dreamland. We've committed to put 2,000 extra mental health workers into the system. 2,000. This is so important, not just for our mental health, but for our children in schools. Now, Shadow Minister Emma Keeley and myself had made this announcement last year, moved a private member's bill in the Parliament to free up mental health support because it's so important. Never has it been so important coming out of COVID to focus on physical and mental health. And a lot of governments will talk about it and not many will do much about it because it looks good for them on a press release. It looks better for us when we know we're fixing the problem. My plan on health is very clear, and we will be running heavily on that over the next 95 or 78 days, whatever it is, because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. But we obviously also have a plan for our economy because we've got to get our economy back on track. And we've got to make sure that this state feels what it naturally has, a confidence in investing in Victoria, confidence in partnership with the government in Victoria, confidence that when you do business with the government, you don't get done over by the government behind the scenes, confidence that the government's word is real. What they tell you and what they agree to is what comes out. We have made an early commitment of no new taxes. David Davis will say this very clearly, because we need to have continuity of policy for the term, for the 4-year period. People need to know this is our principle, this is where we stand, irrespective of what comes. We need to have this on the table so that people know these are the rules in Victoria, they aren't going to change, this is what it takes to do business in that state. There are some small taxes we've announced the removal of. Tradies registration fees, the hikes in those which went straight to the VPA. We will remove that, knowing that so many small tradies have done it very, very hard, who are not employed on government sites. They're employed as small business people. They're employed predominantly in the burbs and in regional Victoria, and they need that hand up. What they don't need is a potential doubling of registration fees by another $600 or $700 a year just to exist, just to do their job at a time we're going through a profitless boom. They don't need that, and that's why we'll cut that. We've said plenty of times, and we'll say it again, the planning reforms that the government committed to last year, we also agree with. They are very good. We'll bring them forward. We'll do it without a tax because that's the right thing to do, and that's what was negotiated with industry groups. This is what needs to be done. Your feedback to government, good ideas. Don't knock the ideas, but it can't go ahead unless if there's taxes attached to it. We'll bring back flying squads for country and regional Victoria and have a target over 2 years of 50,000 lots outside of Melbourne. 50,000 lots because you can't get land supplying at Ararat, in Stawell, in Horsham. How can it be that there's almost nothing left in smaller towns like Echuca, Wangaratta, when their economies are growing, when the state is eking to decentralise? Councils have to put people up in caravans because there's no land, there's no homes available. True story. So we'll bring the flying squads back, 2 of them. We'll set the target of 50,000 lots. We'll have targets for Metro Melbourne as well, without touching the growth boundary, I might add. We've got a $2.5 billion manufacturing pledge, $2.5 billion to reinvest in Victorian business, partnering with government, like MedTech in Shepparton. You see the masks? Very good business. They need partnership with the Victorian government. They don't need the Vic government going to the US, Canada, Malaysia, the UK, Germany to get product when we can do it here in Victoria. If the Victorian government won't invest in Victorian business, why would anyone else? On the contrary, I believe in Victorian business, and that's why this fund's established, with $1 billion of it quarantined outside of Melbourne to invest in the state that we believe in. We'll unlock our gas supplies. We don't believe in banning natural gas. We believe it's part of our transition to the future. When my mum's family came from Ukraine to Australia, like many Russians, Ukrainians, Polish, Lithuanians, throw them all in the mix to fund, Germans, they went to the Latrobe Valley. My grandfather worked in Yallourn A, my uncles at Yallourn W, Hazelwood, Loy Yang A, B, Maryvale. But the people in the Latrobe Valley know that brown coal is not their future. They know that. They're not got blinkers on to what's coming on. They also know, like many of us, that gas is a good transition. We can't go to solar and wind tomorrow. Whatever it may be, technology is going to improve. We know it's going to be a huge amount of gain over the next decade. So have a transition, a cleaner transition. It's not 100%, it's about 30%, but it's a lot better than brown coal. And that should be part of our transition. And on top of that, we've got $1 billion fund for hydrogen to shandy our gas and hydrogen networks like they're doing in the UK, up to 12%, looking to 15%. $1 billion to look at hydrogen production in Victoria. We've got targets that match New South Wales. A few people said to me, why would you have a 50% by 2030 CO2 reduction target? That's what New South Wales has. We need to have continuity of policy between our 2 biggest economies on this front. Climate issues don't follow state borders. So set the same targets. Work toward them so that people know this is what is the target of the Victorian government. We'll legislate it and we believe we can achieve it. And we'll do that again because it's the right thing to do, to transition our economy, to make our economy cleaner. There's no negative in that whatsoever, to invest in technology that makes our economy cleaner. I couldn't think of a better legacy for our children. David Southwick will tell you we've got a $150 million local events attraction fund for live music, for industry, to get our CBD going again. $30 million grant for shopping strips around the state, particularly around the city area, the metro area, to get our local sporting events going again. David will also probably talk to you a bit more about our Concierge Victoria, our Connect Victoria scheme, which has a concierge system for businesses investing in Victoria, a one-stop shop. To have people who want to invest, particularly small business who are trying to do business, have one person to deal with in government, state and local, to manage that burden, to walk them through processes, to assist them, to encourage them. Businesses need that kind of help. New South Wales does that. Singapore does that. The UK does that. Why doesn't Victoria have something similar at a time like this? That's what we'll establish and what David will establish as a minister. Our aim, folks, is to make Melbourne the most livable city in Australia again. Our aim is to get confidence back into Victoria. We know if there's one thing our state needs, it is a government that works with Victorians, not in spite of them. Not hectoring, not lecturing. I promise you I won't wear North Face. But we do need to have a change in attitude. A change in attitude. A government that actually says to people like the Chamber and others, how can you be a part of the solution too? Gone are the days, I think, where government thinks it owns every part of the solution, government alone. Cannot have a prosperous state with that kind of attitude. The one thing I say to this room and to other audiences, doesn't cost a cent. It is an attitude change. And if there's one thing I commit to you today, it is to lead a government that will reflect that wants deeply to work with organisations like the Chamber, with local government, that actually wants to partner with industries around the state, with community groups, to say, how can we work together to make your community a better place? How can we give you confidence again that the government is there for you, not to work in spite of you? That is the kind of government I want to lead. And together, in doing that, we will fix our problems in our health system. We will halve our waiting lists in 4 years. We'll give our nurses, physicians the infrastructure they need. We'll make Victorians feel confident about our health system again. We'll repair the damage to a wrecked economy over 8 years. We'll make sure that our state has that power, that energy, that hunger and that Victorian drive that has been there for so long. We are, as a state, the authors, the architects, the drivers of federation of this country. Never forget that. That happened out of Melbourne. It's people in this city that form the basis and the structure of this country, and we should be proud of that. So many legacies in this country were formed out of ideas coming out of Melbourne. Let's now make the next incarnation of government for ourselves to be one that is about all of us, not just about one person. Thank you very much.
Your mum sounds like my mum. Does she still get upset when you travel without telling her?
She still says, "You're representing me, don't do anything wrong."
I get the lectures too. My mum's in hospital at the moment, so I wish her a speedy recovery as well. But to join us up on stage, can I get David, Georgie and David to join us as well? We are going to get a chance to open it up for audience questions, so have them ready. But let me kick off with a couple. Matt, you covered such an enormous ground in that, and we're going to unpick some of that in the conversation over the next period. But I guess the first one, and travelling around Victoria, particularly those small and family businesses, rising costs, rents going up, energy costs going up. We had an address from David McGill from AGL last week, and there's no end in sight for that. But the biggest issue we're seeing is access to workers, skilled and unskilled workers. Can you talk us through the plans that you've got to address that?
Sustained border closures, both internationally but particularly statewide, have sent a message to the world that Australia is a difficult place to come to. And go back to the start of my discussion, I had two, one's an extended family member and her partner who were in Sri Lanka. They're from Ukraine. And I said, well, you know, you obviously can't go back home, come to Australia. She said, never been here before. She said to me over Messenger, no, I don't want to come to Australia and I don't want to come to Victoria because we're worried that if there's, I'm trying to say it in English, she was a lockdown, they'll be locked inside and they won't get out. That's what they'd heard. It was a hard place to come to. Ultimately, they did come here, but they'd had that impression of Victoria. We need to market our state again. We're losing population. David will tell you this. We cannot keep losing population. It is not just a Excel spreadsheet decline, it is real. And it's not just losing people. It's a brain drain and a capital flight to that area from Byron up to Gympie, and we cannot afford that to continue. We need to encourage it back. And to do that, the government needs to have serious strategies, particularly about overseas migration as well, where we are seeking aggressively to come back to Victoria. I mean, how many times do we get from our colleagues, I say to my colleagues here, the three of us, when we go to country and regional Vic, they say, you know, we cannot fill the jobs we have. We can't, and it's not just people picking fruit or vegetables, it is people working in skilled workforces, manufacturing in particular. The state government needs to be aggressive about this, to have a good relationship with our government in Canberra about whether visa classes can change in categories to bring people here, to provide an incentive as to whether or not that's an extended family group as well if one person comes, but we must provide the incentive to get those workers back. A lot of them, as you know, haven't just left Australia. They've actually got other jobs. They're not sitting at home twiddling their thumbs, you know, in potentially in East Timor or other parts of East or Southern Asia where we might have asked people from the past. They've gone to Canada. They've gone to Germany. So now we're going to have to work doubly hard to be attractive to get those people back again. And that gap will not go away quickly without serious government action.
And no doubt it's a global shortage. So it's not just a Victorian, not just an Australian, but we're feeling it across the board, not only in the CBD, but regional Victoria. The other thing that's coming out in regional Victoria is the cost of doing business. I talked about energy before. It's probably the single biggest issue for those that aren't pegged to a contract already, and those that are worried about what happens when they come out of it. What are your plans to address that for business?
You or me? Well, energy in particular is, as I've said, we need to have that transition, because if we are just looking at brown coal, which is expensive, becoming increasingly more expensive and unreliable with nothing that comes next, and looking at a market that fluctuates through renewables, then from that point of view, energy will continue to get more expensive. We cannot resign ourselves to be a net importer of power. At the moment, that's the government strategy, just rely on Queensland. It's interesting, they want to shut coal-fired power in Victoria to rely on coal-fired power in Queensland as our answer to energy shortages. We have the ability to use gas, a lot of it. And our point of view is we need to look at what is a transition from one to the other, and using that, which is, no, it's not 100% clean, but it's certainly about 30% of what lignite is, and that's a transition out. That'll help with CO2 targets. That'll also help with reliability. If we, as we've said, part of our policy will be to quarantine a portion of that gas supply as domestic, not just domestic supply for household, but also domestic for industry and power, which would be on a different price scale than going to the international market, for instance. Then that means there's a lower price demand or cap for that than there would be if you're going off to an international market. And we have to look at options around gas. If we don't, I walk in shops, for instance, in my own electorate, and they don't heat them anymore because they're just worried about the cost. Dave?
Yeah, and on top of that, I mean, in terms of cost of doing business more broadly, the biggest issue, as you alluded to before, Paul, is the cost of labour, and the fact of we have a labour shortage here in this state. It's the biggest cost for any small business to have. You can't get labour. We don't have the students, which is the big issue, that we need to get students back. We need to get tourists back. We need to get backpackers in. We need to ensure that we've got the casual workforce that will support the rest of the workforce going forward. And to do all of that, the government's got to be an active participant in this and have to show leadership. I know we're going to talk about the CBD later, but I think what we've seen, the government particularly, the role that they've played is effectively be a tenant of the city, not a leader of the city. And Sally's done a wonderful job, and you have, Paul, in terms of some of the activation that we're seeing in the city, but the government just can't be a tenant. They've got to show some real leadership. We've got some people in the room here today that if we sat down together, we could absolutely turn this city and this state around, but we've got to actually have a plan, as Matthew has said today. We've got to have optimism. We've got to ensure that everybody plays their role to do that, and to do that, we've got to be able to engage all the different players that are involved in this, whether it be the universities that in rather than having the students that are effectively online, how do we get them in the classroom? How do we get them into the city going forward? So I know I'm drifting, but the cost of labour, the cost of doing business in this state, Matthew mentioned before about our business concierge service. The fact that any small business in this state has to deal with local government, state government, federal government for all kinds of taxation, all kinds of regulation. Before they even get started, we need to roll out the red carpet for small business to say we're open for business. We need to make it the easiest place in the country to do business, and that's our plan.
We like that. I want to continue the theme with you, David, on the Melbourne CBD. I've got enormous confidence in my friend Justin Haney. He does a lot of work behind the scenes and doesn't get a lot of credit for where the CBD is recovering to. And I know Sally is out there every day, in fact, every minute of the day, promoting the CBD. So we've got two strong advocates for it. What's your voice that you're going to add to the CBD recovery?
Yeah, again, I say that the government needs to play an active role. We've heard the government talk about a hybrid model in terms of the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. The city, night times and weekends, it's alive. What do we do Monday to Friday? That's the big question. Well, the government's talked about a hybrid model, but at the moment, on a 3-day a week, we have a hybrid of a hybrid. So people are effectively not coming back even those 3 days. There is no plan to get people back. And we accept the fact that not everybody's going to work the way they did before. We need something that actually suits the workforce of tomorrow. And the city and all the people you've mentioned, Paul, need to play that role, including the government. And we need to look at what the city might look like in terms of the future. But you've got to show some leadership. Let's start with the public sector. If it is 3 days, let's make it 3 days. Let's sit down with the public sector and say, right, if you're going to be in the city, when do you need to be in the city? Let's make it a reason to be in. Don't force people in without giving them reason. We need to sit down and have those real conversations. The public sector, including the managers, need to show that leadership all the way from the top to sit down with the workforce and say, how can we get you back and make the time that you're here valuable and contribute? Because that's really important in terms of that workforce, the 9 to 5 workforce. Don't punish people, encourage people. And that's part of the plan that needs to happen as well. We also need to think about how do we activate 9 to 5 all the way through, including the students that I said before, encouraging them back. That's going to be a big plan to get international students, our biggest market. We've got to get those international students back. And then I know Sally and the council have done a great job in terms of fashion, in terms of events and activation. But how do we look at some of our events, not just as a one-off or a week, but a 365-day-a-year activity? You look at food, you look at fashion, you look at culture, all of those things in the city. Let's make our fashion, including using RMIT and others, 365 days leading up to an event and beyond the event. Let's look at incubators. Let's get young people in. We've got to change the game. We've got to look at what Melbourne can look like tomorrow to ensure it is a livable city and the most livable state. And to do that, we've all got to work together with a group plan to do this. And what Matt said before, people don't want to be lectured anymore. They want everyone to work together to get that vision, to get that dream. I'm so excited about the passion that we can all bring together as a team, and together we will absolutely do that.
I'm loving the passion there. Georgie, to you, health, we talk about it a lot. It's your DNA. You understand this better than most. And I think it's great to have you in the role that you are. Business, through the last 2 and a bit years, has done its bit. It's stepped back to ensure that the health response in this state is what it is. But business can't keep stepping back. What is your plan to fix the health system as you need to make sure that business not only can continue, but we can live the lives that we want to live in this state as well?
Yes, thanks so much, Paul. Business did do an extraordinary job. I mean, let's just cast our mind back. A lot has happened in the last 2.5 years, but when the virus hit, and it was, hit in Victoria first on January the 25th, 2020, and then the world watched what was happening. Everybody wanted governments to get it right. Everybody was willing, governments at all levels, to get it right. We all wanted that. And business did their bit. Business was told by government, you need to shut down. And they did that. But we learned a lot in those first 6 months. But business kept getting smashed. And I had, as we all had as MPs, small business owners desperate. They were confused. They didn't understand what government was trying to achieve in terms of one level was saying this, another level was saying that. We had a national cabinet. Well, New South Wales was doing one thing and Victoria would do another. That can never happen again, ever. We need to be transparent. We need to be clear about any health response. The virus is still here. It's going to mutate. We all knew that. That's, Blind Freddy could have told you that. It was going to mutate, and it has. We don't know where it's going. And the technology, the vaccinations that are addressing the mutations is tremendous. We've got all that happening. Our population has heeded the advice. 95% are double vaccinated. Only about 35 fourth dose, whatever. But to go to your point, businesses need to remain open. Communities need to be engaged. Business are a part of your community. The mental health aspects. What we've got when we've got shut down and mental health and people not going out to seek the health care they need, they're getting sicker. That's putting more pressure on the system. So a health response has to go across the board, but it's got to be clear and government has to be transparent. I don't believe there's been transparency. And you've probably heard me say that. We've said, release the health advice. The community has to have confidence in government in what they're saying. And we can't have those scenes that happened across Victoria, which was so appalling. We can never have that again. So it's one, transparency. It's about giving you a clear direction. Let's not forget, there were only 14 public health officials in February of March 2020 in the Department of Thousands. 14. They cut them. We need to have a proper public health response team so that when something like this happens, and it will come again, there'll be another pandemic. That's why we've said we need an infectious diseases response centre. That's research, decision-making and clinical, all in the one area, so we can have that clear direction from government.
Great. David, to you, the cost and ease in doing business task force, which was headed up by our Deputy President, Adrian Cloden, and our regional chairperson, Kate Mannix, shone a light on regulation in this state. I think it was Monday we spoke about the amount of approvals that a business needs to open a particular business type in this state as well. Talk us through what your plans are to address some of that.
To make a couple of points here first, we obviously need the hope, the excitement, the push for the state, and Matthew will certainly provide that vision that we need. But we do, as he said, need certainty and predictability. That is about tax policy. It is about the costs and charges that businesses encounter, but it's also importantly about the regulation and the restrictions that they face. Your work, the Chamber's work, I think is very important, and it rates Victoria effectively as the worst of the jurisdictions in the country to actually do business. David says we need to roll out the red carpet, and we do. We need to make it easy for inbound businesses, inbound investment, new businesses, and businesses that are expanding. We need to make it easy for them to get the regulatory approvals they need. I looked very simply at some of your work, and it's clear that New South Wales, which should be the other economy we would mainly compare ourselves with, has much easier approvals, much easier regulatory hurdles than Victoria. It seems to me not impossible that we can get to the level of New South Wales. That is absolutely achievable. So David's concierge approach is part of that, but actually removing some barriers that are unnecessary. Does anyone think that if we removed barriers to the extent of New South Wales, that we'd be in a bad place? We'd be in a much better place. Business would be able to move much more smoothly. But the tax burden is also very important. Taxes, the state tax take has gone up 80% since 2013-14. That is enormous. And the burden in Victoria is really very significant. That's why the commitment on no new taxes. But that also, I think, needs to be seen in the context of the debt. And Victoria's debt has surged up. That debt, much of it pre-COVID, as we say, BC, before COVID, the big projects are all steaming ahead, out of control, massive cost overruns. All of that is happening BC, before COVID. But the debt is there. 167 billion is the number that the budget papers produce in 25-26. At that point, it will be as big as New South Wales, Queensland and Tasmania combined. It will actually be larger than that because the interest rate movements have actually added significant cost, and significant debt will flow out of that. About 1% movement in interest rates is about a 2.55 billion servicing cost over 4 years. So all of those increases in costs, all those increases in taxes make us less competitive. So we can roll out the red carpet, we can cut the business regulation, we can do that, in line with where New South Wales is. That's absolutely achievable. That will make a very significant difference. At the same time, we've got to grow the state. The other thing that we haven't really talked about this morning is the population flight. And Matthew's made the point that we've got to make Victoria attractive. People have got to want to be here. We do have the competition, as he says, people are going to southern Queensland and northern New South Wales. And you know, Victoria was unique in having a significant outflow of population. That was not the case in the other states. That is a uniquely Victorian failure. 263 days of lockdown, huge impacts, but tax is part of it, predictability, certainty. We need to make it the place for people to come, and we do need to grow the population.
Right, we've got about 4 minutes for some rapid fire questions. So I reckon we'll get through 2 from the audience. I want a commitment to get a few people out of here by 10:02. So who, question down the back there. Oh, that's all right, we'll get there. We nearly there?
Yep, almost there.
Righto, great.
Thank you. My name is Rudolf Vandermeer. I'm from Phoenix. I just have a question regarding Victoria's windfall gains tax. Whenever land's rezoned, you pay tax on the unrealised increase in value. Matthew, you mentioned earlier in different areas you're going to release more land, or that's the plan. That will affect, potentially, that kind of tax. It applies from 1 July 2023. Do you propose some changes? Because if your land gets rezoned, then you pay a lot of more taxes on the unrealised increase in value.
I might answer that question.
Okay, thanks.
And let me be clear, it's a terrible tax. It's a shocking, destructive new tax. We opposed it bitterly in the chamber. There was a huge and long sitting where we fought to stop it going through. We had no help from the cluster of Labor voting independents who waved the tax through. We sought to move some amendments to it, recognising we were going to lose the battle and it was going through. Now, the question is, what amendments did we try to do? Well, we said some things. We said, actually, we think that the tax that's collected should be kept in the local area. So if it's raised in Bendigo, the money will be reinvested in Bendigo. We lost that. We said that works in kind, and this is Matthew's innovation as Planning Minister. We said, if you're going to cream this tax off, the developer can acquit part of that by doing works in kind on the site. So this brings forward infrastructure in the local area. So new developments being done, the sporting fields, the community centres, all of that would be built concurrent by the developer and would acquit some of the tax revenue. We lost that too. And we said, actually, if you're redeveloping this land and you're having to rehabilitate it, for example, in some city sites, there's asbestos or, there's cleanup. The tax as it's currently formatted makes no allowance at all for remediation and the costs that are incurred there. So the property, as you correctly say, if the property goes from 10 million to 20 million when it's rezoned, the difficulty is that is 50% of that will go in tax, even if you spent 9 million on a remediation. So I'm not giving you the answer you want to hear, but I'm telling you what happened. It's part of the tax system now. We would love to take steps on it. I can't responsibly say that just at this time. We'll wait and see where we are close to the budget, close to the election period when PBU comes through.
His voice is almost gone.
That tax is the stalking horse for the tax that will probably go for value uplift on the suburban rail loop and the properties along that corridor. That tax is the stalking horse for it. So the term value uplift will be on those residential homes or commercial properties, one of the two or both, and that tax is the stalking horse for it.
Going to take one more from the audience down the back.
Good morning. James Canning from the Consulting Surveyors Association of Victoria. We represent 120 surveying businesses across Victoria. The 50,000 regional lots, Matthew, our 120 members could roll that out in 5 months. I kid you not, in terms of the time to do the survey, to draw the plan, to get it towards the land registry. The process to go from beginning to end will actually take 2 years. That's even after rezoning. Is there anything on your agenda towards planning reform?
Yes, we committed to a number of the planning reforms which the government had worked with a number of industry groups, including the Chamber, on. But also, when I was the minister, we reformed the planning authority to actually use a 20 Part A procedure to actually work with councils on those processes to bring those lots forward. That could be looked at a council's request or their consent in terms of places where there's critical shortage, and I know a number of councils have said that out in the west of Victoria. In fact, they've said to me, do you think we could use the VPA to use that process to bring those lots forward? Yes, they could do it within, I'm sure you could bring all of that forward within 5 months. You could probably sell it within 5 months too. But all of this will be conducted, and the flying squads as well will go through the council existing structure plans, their municipal strategic statements, and the work they've already done as to where they want their towns to grow. It wouldn't be anything beyond that.
Plenty more questions out there, and we've run out of time to do them up here, but I know some of you are going to stick around, so please do it. But I want just a 30-second grab in summary from each of you as we look towards the state election in November. I'm going to come to you last, Matt. So David, with you, 30 seconds.
Stability, predictability, and keeping taxes low, but also we need to grow the population and grow the economy. That is the only way out of where we are now into the future.
We've got to fix our health system. It is broken. There is a real crisis in this state. It's the well-being of everybody, and it's in everybody's interests that we do that.
Hope, certainty and confidence to make Victoria the most livable state and to reposition Victoria as the place to do business.
We're going to fix the health system. We're going to cut the cost of doing business. We're going to ease the pressures on cost of living, and we're going to give confidence back to this state. Confidence that you can work with the government, that the government will work with you, and confidence to make this state again the greatest state in Australia.
Fabulous. David, Georgie, David and Matt, thanks very much for your time this morning.